Ready to record? Okay. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us on behalf of the California Department of Education Special Education Division and the Supporting Inclusive Practices Project. We'd like to welcome you to the second in a series of 7 weekly webinars focused on secondary transition and presented by members of the California Transition Alliance leadership team. My name is Kevin Schaefer, Director of Program Support with the Supporting Inclusive Practices Project out of El Dorado County. Also with us is Kristen Brooks, Executive Director of the Supporting Inclusive Practices Project out of Riverside County. Next slide. The SIP project provides support to LEAs across California to increase inclusive opportunities and improve outcomes for students with disabilities. For more information on the project and to stay current on events throughout the state, you can visit our website at www.sipinclusion.org or join us on Facebook and Twitter at SIP Inclusion. A Padlet has also been developed for future access to recordings, resources, and registration that we'll address in a moment. We've included the registration link on this slide, including a Spanish version for all upcoming webinars for sharing with staff and families. For your convenience, we've muted all participants, but please utilize the chat box for questions and clarifications. Just be aware when using the chat that you are responding to all panelists and attendees. We'll do our best to address your questions. Just know that if we are unable to answer live, there will be a Q&A sheet created and posted on the Padlet for each webinar. Additionally, our team will be adding links to the chat box as we understand they are difficult to copy from the slides. Next slide. For this presentation and those scheduled over the next 5 weeks, we've created a Padlet of resources for you to access. Simply click on the resource you're interested in and download as directed. The first column contains overarching resources, while each subsequent column contains resources specific to each webinar topic. To access the Padlet, which will continue to be updated, you simply need the web address and feel free to share it with colleagues. Be sure to join us next Wednesday, May 6th, for Transition Services that Lead to Post-Secondary Success. All right, before we begin, we have a couple polling questions we'd like you to answer. For the first, we'd like to know who's here today. Kristen, will you pull up the poll? So if you would answer if you're a student, parent or caregiver, family member, educator, agency representative, post-secondary education or training, or other. If your role's not listed in the choices above, please enter them in the chat. We'll just give it a good 30 minutes.
Or seconds, we could do that.
Oh, yeah, or seconds. We could spend the whole time waiting. All right, thanks everyone for entering. And it looks like educators at 68% are the greatest number of participants, agency representatives at 12%. Thank you, that really helps to guide the presentation. Our next polling question asks you to rate your level of knowledge regarding transition as defined by the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA. How would you rate your knowledge? You're brand new. I know some just need to put the pieces together. I'm in the trenches and want to hone my knowledge. I'm an expert, or I want to explore early education activities ages 0 to 16 aligned with secondary transition outcomes. Please make your choice. All right, the results. Looks like 48%. I'm in the trenches and want to hone my knowledge. Excellent. Also 35%, I know some just need to put the pieces together. Well, you've come to the right place. We have the experts from the California Transition Alliance leadership team to present. So next slide. We're grateful for this unique collaborative opportunity with Sue and her team of experts. Please remember to take care of yourselves and those you love. I will now hand it over to Sue Sawyer, who will introduce her team presenting Effective Transition Assessment Strategies. Thank you all for being here with us.
Thank you, Kevin. I'm Sue Sawyer with the California Transition Alliance, and our mission is to provide support and resources to youth and youth-serving professionals who work with youth as they transition from high school to adulthood. When we started, we talked high school. Now we're talking preschool or perhaps early childhood. The California Transition Alliance was established as a nonprofit organization in 2005. Next slide. We accomplished this mission through creating tools and resources. We have a very bad business model. All of the resources we create are available online for free. We provide workshops, we host statewide meetings, we collaborate with state and national partners, we lead work groups. I lead the high school diploma work group, and Richard Rosenberg leads the Social Security work group. And we play a leadership role on the California Community of Practice on secondary transition. I would like to direct your attention to the cover of the Basics book, which is on the right side of the screen. And I want to share how that cover evolved. When you look at the cover, you see a young child looking down the road, and that reinforces the need that we need to start early. There are 3 words on that picture: hope, confidence, and trust. In my experience in working in career guidance and counseling with large numbers of students, I realized that if students lack a sense of hope, if they don't have a sense of optimism about their future, they really struggle to set goals for their future. If they lack a sense of confidence in themselves, the perception that they have the ability to do anything they want to do, then they really struggle with setting post-secondary goals and planning their future. And the third is trust. If they don't have a sense of trust in adult allies who are going to be supportive of them, or trust in resources like financial aid and transportation, or trust in having basic food, clothing, and shelter, they're going to struggle with setting goals. So as we go through the process of saying, and what are your plans for the future, these could be the foundation issues that block them from being able to establish goals. And if they have hope and confidence, but they lack trust, they're still not going to set goals for their future. Next slide. Today we're talking about effective transition strategies that inform post-secondary goals. Our goal for the webinar is to explore a variety of assessment strategies that can be used with all youth, including youth with disabilities. And when you get right down to the basics, when we're talking about career guidance and career planning, we're trying to figure out, what do you love to do? What are you good at? And what does the world need so you'll get paid? And when all 3 of those converge, that's the perfect job. Richard is going to start us off with person-centered planning. I am going to follow him with some effective transition strategies, and Val is going to culminate this workshop with transition portfolios. Next slide. I'd like to introduce Richard Rosenberg. He's talking person-centered planning for the future, family-friendly assessment. Dr. Rosenberg has a long history of being a trainer and a consultant, a regional manager. He's worked with various universities, and he can share his latest, greatest adventure. Take it away, Richard.
Thank you, Sue. Thank you, Kevin. This is exciting. Looking at the variety of people on the call, it's great. I have been doing person-centered planning for over 30 years, and I'm excited to share. Even though I only have 30 minutes, I will do the best I can. Next slide, please. Next slide to get to the headers. Person Center is a setting the stage for collaboration and partnership. It really changes how we do business and what that looks like. We look at the individual from his or her point of view. Next slide, please. One of my favorite slides that I got years ago at the University of Wisconsin in Madison was, what does person-centered, person-driven planning mean? It means listening to our individuals with a different way of listening and a different set of ears. Because we really want to hear the person, not just see them as a test score, not just see them as a label, not to see them just as a place where they receive services, not see them as a person of, oh my God, they'll never be able to A, B, or C. So the quote is, if you're going to work for me, you have to listen to me. And you can't just listen with your ears because it will go to your head too fast. You have to listen with your whole body. If you listen slow with your whole self, some of what I say will enter your heart. And I really think that's a huge statement as far as what this is all about, where we've come from as we navigate and we move on. Next slide, please. Many people have heard person-centered planning. A colleague of ours, Karen Sachs at San Diego State, has helped all of us think a little bit differently to turn it to person-driven planning. And what that means is it's not good enough to just have little Richie in the middle of the meeting and he's in the center, and that's good for Richie and his life and his dreams and his nightmares. No, he needs to be driving it. He needs to be moving it forward and having that investment. So we kind of use it simultaneously. Person-centered planning gets it out of, IQ scores, class placements, doom and gloom, etc. Person-driven takes it the next step, that I'm really driving my program. It's an ongoing problem-solving process used to help people with disabilities plan for their future. In the person-centered, person-driven planning, groups of people focus on an individual and that person's vision of what would like to do in the future. The person-centered, person-driven team meets to identify opportunities for the student to develop personal relationship, participate in the community, increase control over their own lives, and develop skills and abilities needed to achieve these goals. And you'll look, there's a little page number there, and I'll be Vanna even in my ocean, which may or may not come up. The guide that Sue related to is on the tablet. We've put our page numbers to different sections. Next slide, please.
Richard, it's also in the chat, and they can also access it from the Padlet.
Thank you, Kevin. Appreciate it. In developing a person plan, we need to consider the following logistics. Next. Whose life is it? Don't accommodate the mommy and the daddy who wants them to go to college, who wants them to have a job and never have to clean the bathroom. It's the individual's person's life, what that looks like. Who should be at these meetings? Next bullet. The next bullet and the next bullet. What's important is who should be at the meeting really takes a chrysalis, looks at the future and decide what is the age of the individual, who's in their circle, where are they going. I've done person-centered plannings and others have done it with little kids where we really try to change expectations of the family, of the grandparents. We've also done it at grade articulation. They're going from middle school, going to high school. What's that going to look like? Who's going to be out there? So it really is a great way to track to the future. And many times we've used this process where we may have a bottleneck between families, school district, administration, the kid himself or herself. Where should the meeting be held? It could be held at a home. It could be held at a Starbucks. It could be held in an IEP room. It could be held at a community center. It could be held as a picnic. It really depends on that individual. And there is no magic. It could be 2 or 3 people. It could be an audience of 30. We really are pleased to look at it as a process to change people's headsets as they're moving forward. How should we prepare for these meetings? To me, the most important is to figure out how can we help the individual, himself or herself, feel engaged in the meeting. Let me share a prep story that kind of backfired on me, but life is good. A young man with Down syndrome who I've known his whole life, He made it through middle school, high school. He did some creative transition where he went to Fullerton. He went to the adult transition program. Everything is good. When he was 19, 20, I want to move out, Richard. I want to move out. Great. However, the family wasn't quite ready. So now how do we prepare? I usually talk to the individual, either communicate with them. How are you doing? What's it look like? And the bottom line is, after 2 years of graduation, he liked the comforts at home. He was no longer as eager to move out. So how do we prepare is really timing, asking the right questions, and engaging the individual as we navigate. Next slide, please. And as you do this slide, just go with me, facilitator. Hit the first button and then continue. My gifts and my talents. What works and what doesn't work for me. My greatest challenges. What are my real needs? Places I go, places I enjoy. My health and wellness is really important. What are my medical needs, health needs, etc.? How do I communicate? A person-centered plan does not have to be for just people who go back and forth talking. We could use alternative communications. We can use sign language, gestures, talk to other people. Choices I make. It is my life. That's what we're looking at. How I interact with others. What do I do socially? Do I have any friends? What that looks like. People in my life. Who are the significant people? My life story. What I've done, where I've gone, what that looks like. My likes and my dislikes. And I think it really is important at this point to recognize when we did the Woodcock-Johnson and we did the KT, we did these assessments, we come up with scores. The person-centered planning gets us out of the score mentality into the real world for that individual as he or she navigates. Next. It's a problem-solving process. Go for it. Team meets to identify opportunities for the student. Keep going. Develop personal relationships. Participate in the community. Increase control over their own lives, develop skills and abilities needed to achieve their goals. And what's important at this point is, I keep saying, there is no magic wand, there is no right way or wrong way to do a person-centered plan meeting, but what we ultimately need to do is hear the voice of the child, the individual. There have been a number of meetings, and some people I saw who registered who know me, I may physically block a mother or a father from getting too engaged in the meeting because we have to hear it from the child's point of view. And again, hearing their voice. Next. There are some cheat sheets and some cards. As I said, there are different ways of doing it. They're also in the Padlet. Next. You can look and fill in, what does this person do, recreation, social? What do they do, independent living? Next, what are they doing, education, and what that looks like. Next slide. The game plan. The best way to complete a plan is to sit down with your family and friends and work through the questions together. We have uploaded on the Padlet a lot of different models. Bill Allen and John Shea created another one that's great. They're just Beth Mount. There are others that are out there that are great. When you meet together, keep things positive. Take turns talking and respect everyone's right to choose to talk or not talk. Be respectful of each other's ideas and information. Ask for clarity before you put it up there. Mommy says, I want to go to college. Richard, do you really want to go to college? No, I want to go to work in automotive. That is a dialogue. We really have to listen differently, articulate differently, and put it up on a board. Many times, and I didn't say it, we get butcher paper, wrapping paper, big sheets of paper to kind of get some excitement out there on the person-driven plan, and you'll see that in a minute. Support one another if someone becomes uncomfortable or upset, often to meet again at a later point if someone gets stuck. I did one for Carlo, who you'll meet in a minute, and hers was her 16th birthday, about 16 years ago. She ripped up what we had written down. She was overwhelmed when we had the meeting come together. And then I went and I said, Carla, can I uncrumple it and share? And we did that. Set a date and time to talk again about how the plan is working and how to meet the needs for the future. End the meeting with a positive summary of what you talked about and what the next steps are. These meetings can be for all ages and all individuals with different communication means and skills. Next slide, please. I started with Marcia Forrest and Jack Pierpoint, and we used the MAPS mandala. It's making an action plan where we talk about the history, we talk about the dreams, we talk about the nightmare, we talk about who is the person, what are their gifts, what are the person's needs, what do we need to build on their needs, and how do we do a plan to avoid the nightmare and build the dream. Next slide. Many times I did some work years ago and went to Minnesota and they said, this is all great, Richard, but we're not going to do the action plan. And I freaked out. You've got to do an action plan. We don't want to have a meeting to get people excited and not do an action plan. Next slide. There's also what we call a path plan, which is a plan towards the North Star. And go to my next graphic that kind of spells that out a little bit, where you talk about planning alternative tomorrows with hope. You see the North Star in the upper right. You then come back to your goals. What's life looking in a year? What's happening now? Who are the people to enroll? Ways to build strength, commitment to your first step. What are you going to do next month? And how do you chart your actions? It's just another way of really telling the story. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. I have to put my nephew in because he's my man. We've gone through life together. He's lived with us and our family and his mother, and really looking to the future for Michael. And where has that lived? He's been fully included his whole life, great time in transition. He's now in adult program, but he wanted to move out. That was a little tough on us. Next slide. He moved out. He's got his keys to his house. He lives with Robert and Tim in a nice house, has his own bedroom, bathroom. It's his life with two cool dudes, and that's his supported living. But every time I see this slide, I get chills with him having a key to his house as he navigates. Next slide, please. RJ Mitty came to our California conference last year, 2 years ago, and really is a great star and a great advocate. He really has moved the energy to see the value of listening to individuals, to listen to their hopes, their dreams, their interests, and plan for the future. So he's another ally of ours that we have out there. Next slide, please. I'm Determined has different templates you may want to use. What are my goals? What are my next steps? What are my outcomes? And who do I need to engage as I do that? And then next slide, I'm going to go through an individual, John. Sue relate to him. We may relate to him in future trainings. He's a high school kid. He joined the cross country team and he likes Xbox, camping, going to movies, talking on the phone with people. Next slide, please. And it really shows what those sheets of paper could look like. Who was involved in his meeting? I live with mom, my sister, my brother. He has a girlfriend. He hangs out with friends, with family. He does trips. He goes to the movie, etc. Next slide, please. Who's in his life? Present status. He takes out the garbage, how he does laundry, makes things happen. He wants to learn how to cook. Next slide, please. We've got to talk about financial planning, educational planning, and life planning. So these are just slides to put us into our framework that it's real. What does the life look like for this young man? And the next slide. He's a freshman. His favorite subject is math. Graduates in 4 years with an A diploma is the goal. Goes with staying organized. He helps in the science class. After high school, he wants to go in the Marines and go through college, possibly online, and maybe fire science. Next slide, please. He needs to work out transportation. His needs is to go through driver's ed and what that looks like. And then the next slide, please. My fears, not finishing school, being a dropout. My dream, I can see myself being rich, getting sponsored for bike riding. And then the next slide. This is just a summary, and we really do have to take from looking at these cool images and the future, down to what's it going to look like in the future. And I'll let Sue finish that up in her presentation of looking for John in the future. Next slide. Let me talk about Ryan. Ryan is a friend of mine. He's 18 years old. He had an IEP since he was in elementary school. He has the label of ADD and ADHD. Moving from school to adult life was tough on him, and being able to figure out how to navigate. So let's go to the next slide in a video that kind of tells Ryan's story of tying his dreams to reality and linking resources.
All right, hi, Miranda Gatto. So I've had an IEP since about third grade, and it's been a struggle from middle school to high school going through it, but it's all worth it, and it's all a phase in life, and if I can do it, anyone can. Hey, I'm Sergio. I'm one of the counselors here at the Department of Rehabilitation. I'm Ryan. New student.
And going to?
Oh yeah, going to Rio Hondo.
And what do you want to do when you grow up?
Be a firefighter or besides with the undergrad.
Perfect.
Awesome. So we're here to help you. We're gonna open up the case for Ryan and pick a burger. Hedge phones, probably like a little fidget tool, just tappings and stuff like that. And probably reading, or that's about it. Just yeah. Oh yeah, note taking for sure. I would like to record like lectures if I can out of accommodation, and to get notes from like classes. Nah, but that's about it. Yeah. Hondo, you already know.
And what are we doing here, Ryan?
Oh, aid, you already know.
Yes.
You already know. Getting that education. My sophomore year, I really didn't want to go to college in there. That's inspired me. But thanks to the people at Harmony Center, Richard, my mom, the supportive team around me. Now I've gotten an open case with Department of Rehab. I've signed up for a Hondo, and now I'm going to be a firefighter at Royal Hondo College. So, life is good, and, if I can do it, anyone can,
If I can do it, anyone can. I think what's important about Ryan's story is he left our high school district. I'm not necessarily proud of this. He was not connected with DR. He was not as well connected with the Office of Students with Disabilities. So I did spend a day with him. We got all the paperwork organized. And within a day, because of expedited enrollment with the Department of Rehab and because of the relationship with OSD, we were able in a day to get him in those support networks. But as he said, and I think an important message here, in 10th grade, at the end of his 10th grade IEP at 15, Ryan came away from that meeting, not because of teachers. He did it himself by saying, I ain't going to college. I'm not smart. I'm going to drop out of the football team. They told me how I'm not bright, da-da-da-da. So he created in his own mind how he wouldn't be able to have a good future. So that's where we came together, a group of people working with Ryan to really change that headset that he created himself to get to the point that I'm okay, I can go to Rio, I can get DR support, and I can make it happen. How do we personalize the person-driven plan? We customize PowerPoints. We may do a black and white copy, or we may do a video copy. Next slide, please. Again, if you look at page 7 in our guide to the basics, IEP meetings, it can be part of the process. It can be introduced at the process. How do we introduce people to what my dreams are and what my futures are? You may look at a previous person-centered plan, or you may have the plan develop a visual or video resume. Next slide, please. I'm just going to show a couple more examples, and then I'm going to turn it over to Sue Sawyer. These were a group of young men, one family. They had a common genetic challenge that put him in the wheelchair with nurses around the clock, you can see my chicken scratch in the back, where we really talked about what does life look like, and what these boys said in their communication without language like you and I. We just want some time away from mom and dad. Who doesn't want some time away from mom and dad? Next slide, please. So we were able to connect them to Rad Camp, which was a camp that embraced persons with and without disabilities, and they had the time of their life. Their nurses went with them, so they got supported. And to me, it's just another living example where the person-driven plan could change a trajectory for an individual. Next slide, please. Carla's another young woman that I've supported for years, and my wife. In the beginning, when she was fully included at elementary school, they really did build a cage for her. They thought it was great that she was coming to school, but they had to protect her from the other kids. Next slide, please. And then we came together at her 16th birthday. That was her team, teacher, family, friends, colleague from another university. Next slide, please. We then had a great meeting talking about her future and her dreams. Next slide, please. We had a variety of meetings that would talk about her dreams, and some of her friends and support staff were much more creative than Richard to do the graphics. Next slide, please. She did, when we had Blockbuster, or Hollywood Video, she worked there for 9 years. It was a TPP placement. We then got her creatively into Long Beach State through an audit of a class, and that made her life. Next slide, please. Going to college was great. Next slide, please. Having her friends over. This meeting is pretty intense. Carla did have a health issue with some cancer. The gentleman in the bottom slide with the daughter on his lap was her oncologist. How many person-centered plan meetings do you have a doctor come in? And that was just, he heard about it. He wanted to be engaged. Next slide, please. We now have, and she has her own nonprofit, which is a pop-up movie restaurants, and we meet periodically. She's had a number of pop-ups once every other month. She makes a little money. She brings people together. It's been huge. Next slide, please. Just shows one of the pop-ups and the college kids who have their art, music, or videos being premiered. Next slide, please. Just shows she has her handbook. She knows what she wants, and she tells us. An offshoot is she created a Bible movie club. Next slide, please. The power of person-centered, person-driven plans. Change one perspective, move through expectation, create possibilities, not deficits. It is very real-based, and it leads to check-in and commitments of family, community members, teachers, regional center, Department of Rehab. Next slide, please. I would love to turn it over to Sue Sawyer. Next slide, please. Sue is our president of the Alliance, a huge leader, been on a great path for years. I'm not going to take any more time, Sue. It's all yours. Thank you very much, team. Sue.
Thank you, Richard. Next slide, please. Today, we're going to explore assessment from the perspective of the IDEA mandate. The IDEA stipulates that the IEP must include measurable post-secondary goals based upon age-appropriate assessment related to training, education, and employment, and where appropriate, independent living skills. We're going to come back to that statement. And the transition services, including the course of study, needed to help the child reach those goals. Assessment is the foundation for the IEP. It justifies everything else that's in the transition portion of the IEP. Assessments must be updated annually, and post-secondary goals must be reviewed annually. It doesn't necessarily have to change the post-secondary goal, but there has to be a process for doing assessment to validate that that goal is still the valid goal. Next slide, please. When I said that I'm not happy with the concept of independent living skills when appropriate, this is a chart that has essential life skills for all teens. I haven't met very many 18 or 20-year-olds, or in my case, a 45-year-old son who has mastered all of these essential life skills. So we strongly recommend that we list the independent living skills in an IEP. The essential life skills are so critical that a man by the name of Kenneth Gray at the University of Pennsylvania did a research on why students who leave high school and enter the university and move away from their home and family drop out of school at the rate of 30% within the first semester. As he did the research, he concluded that we need to have academic skills. The students need to have a career focus in order to know why they were there, why they were choosing the classes that they were participating in, and they needed independent living skills. And for those students who lack the independent living skills, things like knowing how to manage money, knowing how to get around a strange community, knowing how to do their own laundry, those students left within the first 2 weeks of entering the university. They kind of regrouped and they came back eventually, but that's how important independent living skills are. Next slide. So we're talking about transition assessments, and there are a lot of factors to consider in transition assessment. One of them is the career planning process. The other one is other transition issues like readiness for transition, life skills, housing, transportation, money, eligibility for support services. But the focus of today is really going to be on the career planning process. And to be honest, I have done it for a long time, and this is the part that I just love. Next slide, please. So what's the value of career planning, and for all students? First of all, it helps students set realistic goals about their future. It motivates learning. It motivates them to pursue post-secondary education and training. It can improve the college going and staying rates. It improves the ability to achieve economic self-sufficiency. It saves money, less time in school, fewer changes in majors or changing your mind about careers and not being able to meet the persistent and retention expectations of the college. And it answers the question, why? Why do I need to learn this? Why do I need education and training? Next slide, please. When you're thinking about creating an assessment system, there are some things that are really important to consider. One of them is the age and grade appropriateness of assessments. If you ask a student to respond to these adult level tasks, one assessment actually asked students if they would like to design prosthetics. Their response was they had never heard of the word. It was outside their vocabulary, and it was definitely outside of their realm of experience. So they said no. And so when you're not using the correct instrument, you end up with a flat profile, no likes and mostly dislikes. Student readiness to respond to the assessment is really important to give consideration. And sometimes they resist because of the influences of having that sense of optimism and confidence. Sometimes they struggle to deal with language and vocabulary. That's why the system that Richard just presented helps with them understanding things. And whether or not they perceive it's relevant, and the influence on family and peers, and cultural sensitivity. I want to go back to family and peers. We had a young man who was in workability, and he said he wanted to work at Caltrans. So we put him at Caltrans, and he was hiding. He was avoiding doing any of the work. So we asked him if he wanted to try a different placement. We put him in a restaurant. He was having fun. He was interactive. He was doing the tasks. The employer wanted to hire him. And then we said, where would you prefer to work? And he said, Caltrans, because my dad said it was a really good paying job. So some of these things do have the influence of family, and we need to be sensitive to that, and also cultural sensitivity. If you haven't visited the What You Can Do campaign.org, it has some wonderful resources about motivating students. Next slide, please. So the most common assessment strategies help students discover their own interests, abilities, and inform their choices. It should culminate in them developing their plan for their future. There are some formal assessments and there are a variety of informal assessments. But the essential component of any assessment process is reflection. The student needs to gain insight and understanding, and the student needs to reflect on what he or she has learned about themselves. Next slide. This is just a list of a variety of kinds of informal assessments and formal assessments that we've probably all experienced. Next slide. I want to take some time to go back to John's person-centered plan and see how we tie it into parts of the IEP. So John lives in Modesto and he's in the 9th grade. His high school completion goal is a diploma. He expressed a lot of career interests: fire science, mechanics, competitive bike rider. He expressed a variety of education and training goals: entering the Marines, attend college online, earn a 4-year degree. He has hobbies: cross-country team, football, camping, going to movies with friends. His favorite subject is math, and he defined some independent living skill needs: driver's ed, money management, and cooking. So as you look at the matrix of, or the pyramid of goal setting, first, I wouldn't say that John struggles to state interests and skills. He's got a variety of interests and skills. He has a lot of things going for him, and he has ideas he needs to explore before he really has those goals defined. What level of training would be needed? He talked about going into the Marines. He would have to take the ASVAB to see if he qualified. And for mechanics, sometimes you don't need necessarily to have a 4-year degree to be a technician. So you might visit the Career One Stop and research certification programs. He might be capable of enrolling in the CTE pathway programs. In this case, it could be the CTE pathway for transportation, or for, he wants to be, he likes fire science. There is one for the fire technology. One of the things that I would do next is, after we did the assessment the next year, I would go to California Career Zone. I know many of you use it, and it is amazing. And one of the things that we have on California Career Zone is the discovery of possibilities, and it has an interest profiler, it has information about careers, and it has the ability to explore sectors. It even has a budgeting tool in it, and you can use it to really develop some career goals. The second thing that we talk about too is the virtual job shadow, the virtual job exploration. Right now, we can't go out and we can't do the hands-on in the business kinds of things, but virtually you can visit a business. For example, the Modesto Bicycle Shop is open. I went to their website. It has tons of resources about who they are, what they sell, what types of things they're engaged in the community. They even have a bicycle team. So eventually, when we're out from lockdown, maybe he could have a work experience opportunity there. The other thing he could do is watch videos of people working in the careers he has as interest. We have a variety of virtual job exploration resources. YouTube is the go-to for everything. And we also have Road Trip Nation, which is also on YouTube. So those are just some ideas about how you take John's person-centered plan and you make it actionable within the IEP. And you help him explore his interests and his ideas, and you help him develop his own plans so he can figure out what jobs he loves and what skills he has. Next slide, please. I want to take just a minute to talk about the Holland Code. The Holland Code is something that has been around for a long time. It was created by John Holland, and he said, you know, we need to have a system for categorizing careers. So he took a look at the job tasks, and he also took a look at personality characteristics. And he said basically every job could fit in one of these 6 areas. So one of them is realistic. It's the people with hands-on. like hands-on. They like working with tools and equipment. Some of them like to work outdoors. They like to be practical, independent, and the work they do is pretty systemic. We have the investigative personality that loves to do research, that works on research. They're inquisitive, they're analytical, they're scientific. They have a tendency to really like to work independently. And then you have the artistic person. And when we talk about artist, we're not talking about a specific artistic skill necessarily, but that creativity that leads to innovation and intuitiveness and things like that. Another one is social, and those people thrive on being around people and helping people. They're outgoing in their understanding. It goes from healthcare and counseling and education and all those things that are helping by nature. And it also goes into some of those personal service things. Then we have the enterprising personalities. They're extroverted, they're persuasive, they're assertive. So there are lots of ways that these people are assuming leadership in their community through public office. There are people who are introverted, persuasive, a lot of them are in sales. And then we have the conventional personality, and that conventional personality really likes order and structure. They like accuracy, they're methodical, they're practical, and they like to have things that are in patterns. And sometimes those patterns might be the alphabet, sometimes it might be doing some other things. But anyway, so we've got these 6 categories, and some of them go together and some not so much. For example, if the investigative person tries to be a car salesman, which is enterprising, he would talk you out of every car on the lot because he would analyze the size of the engine and all the aspects of the car. The enterprising person can give you 120 reasons to buy every car on their lot. Put your money down today. And so you can see how things are consistent with each other and compatible with each other. The conventional person is highly organized. And as a creative person that doesn't file, I pile. I drive the conventional person nuts. So next slide. This is an example of the Holland Code that New Hampshire actually created this, but it has a really good descriptor of the code, and it has a color-coded system for taking a look at each of the examples. This example is in the Padlet, but it's just an idea to try to think about how the Holland Code is used. The other piece to this is the Holland Code is the foundation for all the other interest surveys. So when you go on Interest Profiler, it's based on the Holland Code. If you go to My Next Move, it's based on the Holland Code. ONET is based on the Holland Code. So there are a lot of issues around that. The other thing that we've done, next slide, is created a pictorial version, a career interest inventory that really ties this again to the Holland Code. It's just a simple screening, but it does do, and there are 3 different forms of career interest inventories on the Padlet. Next slide.
Sue, would you mind answering a question that was in the Q&A?
Sure.
It's a teacher asked me if there was a difference between vocational assessments and inventory for ITP compliance. I told them we use vocational interest inventories as assessments as well. Does CDE agree for ITP compliance?
Well, when you talk about ITP compliance, you're talking about compliance with the IDEA, and we just explored all the different things. But a vocational assessment sometimes goes deeper, and it takes a look at things like the aptitude testing. It takes a look at things like personality inventories or learning styles. So there are a variety of things that all fall under that big umbrella called vocational assessment. This is more honing in on that career assessment, that one that leads to the statement of post-secondary goals in terms of education and employment.
Great. And just a quick follow-up, should TRIs use a normed vocational assessment, or is an informal or non-normed assessment inventory still okay?
The informal assessment is just fine. You have to prove that you've talked to the student. The person-centered plan is informal and it's perfect. The kinds of things that we're doing on here today is informal, they're perfect. The difference between having a formal assessment is one that requires standardization, and it also requires the issue of credentialing in many instances or specialized training. And what we find is that the interest surveys that we're talking about today are just as effective, maybe even more so, especially if you want to get at the heart of the person-centered planning process. Does that answer your question?
Thank you.
Okay, next slide. Oh, sorry, stay here. One of the things that we did is because we wanted to get students enrolled in career pathways, and we really wanted to examine industry sectors. So we created these mobility paths, and there are 9 or 10 of them that are on our website. And what we said was, let's take a look at hotels. What kinds of jobs can somebody do in the hotel? And we came up with about 40 jobs. And then we took a look at those jobs and their relationship to the Holland Code. So within the hotels, how many people are realistic in this color coding system? They're the green ones. How many are investigative? How many are artistic? The artistic is kind of the purple one. And then there's the social, which is blue, and the enterprising, which is pink. And we took a look at these from the standpoint of what kinds of careers are entry points, your first job in the hotel industry. And each one of the jobs that are listed that have a door as the icon is an entry point. The second one is the shooting star, the career technical training. And the third one is those careers that require a 4-year degree or more. So you can see we've got the controller that's doing a lot of the business side of it. We have a general manager in charge of everything. We have food and beverage directors. We have front office management. We have front office where you greet the guests. We have human resources. We have customer service. We have all the support services in that area. We have engineering, and we have sales. So when you go to a person who is teaching a career technical ed pathway and say, I want my student involved in this, and they say, well, we don't see where their career path is, this is a tool that might help. This is specific to hospitality and tourism. Next slide. You always encounter some students who have absolutely set their goals. And one of the things that, that we do is you ask them what they want to do, and they will tell you what they want to do. But sometimes the word they use to describe the job isn't really the job they're thinking about. It's the word they can come up with. So I'm going through a couple of examples of how we use the Holland Code and how we do all of this and put it together. So this person said, I want to be a professional skier. When you say, what is there about skiing you like? They say, I love being at a ski resort. So maybe they want to be a professional skier, but maybe they want to work at a ski resort. And so we started brainstorming. If you really love to ski, what other kinds of jobs might you pursue in addition to being a professional skier? And for some students, it's kind of like you might need a plan B. And so in this one, we talk about those the ski resort architecture, the equipment tester, the ski park operator, ski patrol, ski instructor, competitor, graphic artist, skier, snowboarder. And then it goes into some of those related to the businesses. Some it goes into what you can do with sports magazines and things like that. You could function at a ski resort as an EMT. So the result is that the student's passion is right in the center of the planning process. And this is a brainstorming activity to help that student consider other options. Okay, next slide. Sometimes they'll tell you, but they struggle with vocabulary. This young person wanted to be a teacher, and when I asked, what is it you liked about being a teacher? She said, I love children. And so we started doing the same circle. This event actually happened in one of the classes. And so we started talking about, well, if you love children, you might babysit, you might be in preschool, you might work in daycare, you might be a nanny. You could explore occupations in recreation. You could be a youth coach. You could be an instructor at the Y. You could be a camp counselor. You could be a teacher. We always put their interest in the middle of it. You could be a tutor. And you can start to build, and you can explore others. We have a variety of others, and if you have other things you'd like to add to this chart, send them to us and we'll make one of those official looking charts from it. So put them in the chat box. The other thing I would like to know is whether or not you're aware that the Red Cross offers babysitting certificates. And my 12-year-old granddaughter was really frustrated when schools closed and everything because she had worked real hard to earn her babysitting certificate. So she has a Red Cross authentic certificate for babysitting. And it can be, the whole thing was completed online. And I asked her what part was the most difficult, and she said, giving CPR to babies. So this is another way that you can integrate certification into the thinking process. And there are several online certificates that are available through the Red Cross. There's some available through the Y, a variety of places you can go, and it's well worth exploring. Not a bad idea for students, even who don't want to be a teacher, to know how to take care of a child. So anyway, just throwing that in there. Next slide. So how did we create the original pretty version, and how do we explore what kinds of careers need to be included? I go to My Next Move, and it is a website that is actually connected with ONET, and ONET is the Occupational Information Network that's national. And I like My Next Move because you can search careers with keywords. And so I put children in this search box, and I'll show you what the results were in just a minute. The other thing that I would share is that sometimes students say, I don't know why I have to learn math. I don't know why I have to learn geometry. I really don't get why I have to learn English skills. Well, you can put those academic skills in the search, and then you can find out, you can help the students explore what kinds of jobs require those skills. So let's go to the next slide. When I put the search for careers for children, it came up with about 20 different, and these are the top 20 careers. So you can see that it has a variety. And then you go to the next slide, and this is what a child care worker job looks like when you go to ONET. You can see that it's pretty easily and simply laid out. You can have students watch the career video. It tells you what knowledge, skills, abilities, what personality and technology matches this the closest, and it has what level of education you need. And one of the things that's really nice about the education piece is in that you can click on find certifications or find apprenticeships, and it will take you to what kinds of certifications are available within proximity of your zip code. So there are a lot of different ways that you can pursue exploring educational opportunities to find out what education is required for different careers. So the assessment data can inform post-secondary employment goals. It can be used to research the application of academic skills. The education, if you start with the post-secondary employment goal, go to some of this research, the student can find out what level of education is required to achieve that goal. And that becomes part of your post-secondary education and training goal on the IEPs. And Outlook is there, and it tells you how much you earn, and it also tells you whether or not you're avoiding jobs that are going to become obsolete in the future. Okay, next slide. And I am going to conclude on authentic assessment, because what we've talked about with person-centered planning, and we've talked about with different career assessments and different vocational assessments, is kind of a paper pencil thing. But authentic assessments allow students to be able to demonstrate their skills and ability. And as we think about inclusive education, and we think about validating multiple ways of demonstrating learning, the authentic assessment might be a way to go. Authentic assessments allow students to demonstrate their skills, their abilities, and that they have learned tasks. One of the ways that we do authentic assessments now, because cell phones are so popular, and Val's going to explore this in more depth, is with the videos, because a video can be an authentic assessment tool. If my IEP goal is that I am going to bake a cake, then I could go online on a YouTube, get the directions for how to bake a cake, or I could read the box, and then I could video myself baking a cake. And that would validate, yeah, I have the skills and abilities to do it. The music departments at some schools require that students submit videos as auditions. My granddaughter was interested in being in an ensemble that they were forming at their school, and the teacher sent her music, and she was required to send a video of her playing the music as an audition to see if she qualified for that. Employers are frequently requiring applicants to submit a video to their response to questions too. And there are a variety of authentic assessments that include observations, situational assessments, workplace training. These are the ways you assess people, but you're not looking at the pen and paper, and you're not looking at the traditional kinds of assessments. Okay, next slide. Career exploration should answer these questions. As students reflect on what they've learned by going through career exploration, is this the type of work I want to do? When I look at these videos, is this where I want to work? Am I interested in working in that same environment? Does the career match my interests, skills, and strengths? What skills would I need to strengthen to do the work? Where can I get the training? Do I need a certificate or a college degree or an apprenticeship? And there are some more resources in the Padlet. Next slide, please. So assessments lead to employment goals. The employment goals lead to training, and independent living skills should be based on person-centered plans and assessment. Pages 16 and 17 in the book. Next slide. So there are a variety of resources in the Padlet, and we invite you to go there. Another resource that we just put in last night was the books, I Want to Work, I Know I Can. There's an English and a Spanish version to those books. They are tools to have dialogues between parents and their family members to explore different aspects of setting the goal. So that book is used for a lot of people. Okay, next slide. This is just a reminder that the IDEA requires that you have to describe the assessment that's used annually in education and training. You have to provide this information. You do not need to list informal assessments, especially those you expect your whole class to do on an assessment plan. It does require an individualized formal transition assessment to be listed on the assessment plan. So remember, how does the student reflect on the assessment, and how assessments drive and justify post-secondary goals and services? Next slide. I want to introduce Val Wiltsey. She's a program specialist for Monterey County Office of Education, and she's involved with Captain, and she is a member of the California Transition Leadership Team. Take it away, Val.
Thank you, Sue, and what a pleasure to be here today. And I have the pleasure of closing it off with discussion on portfolios. Portfolios are used by working professionals and students to highlight their best work and display accomplishments, skills, and potential. Portfolios visually showcase examples of work, while a resume only provides bullet point. It's essential to have an objective when creating your portfolio. Our aim in special education is to assure we highlight and demonstrated mandated coverage in employment, post-secondary education and training, and independent living skills. Designing an individualized portfolio chronologizing a student's areas of strengths and featured accomplishment is the intent of a secondary transition portfolio. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. A portfolio is a documentation of a student's roadmap to their post-secondary ambitions, goal pathways, successes, and strengths as they journey to adulthood. Next slide, please. As the educator supporting and leading the student through their secondary transition planning, keep the mindset that one, the process is far more than a two-page IEP document, and two, the portfolio is not intended as proof that the transition planning steps are taking place by the education organization. But the intent of the student portfolio is person-centered and reflects the positive attributes of the student, their assets, strengths, and that it is personalized on what the student wants in the portfolio to help guide them into their post-secondary goals and lives. Next slide, please. A student portfolio is a collection of students' work over time. It is a recorded summation of a student's mastery of post-secondary interests related to training, education, employment, and where appropriate, independent living skills. Portfolios show the cumulative efforts and learning of a particular student over time. They offer valuable data about the student, improvement, and skill mastery over time, along with student reflection. The data provides useful information about how each student learns and what is important to him or her in the learning process. The portfolio information can include the age-appropriate assessments as well, by choice of the individual. Next slide, please. Referencing and looping back to last week's webinar and quoting Liz Zastro, program specialist out of Lodi Unified School District, secondary transition planning doesn't just happen at 16. It starts in the early formative years. Liz discussed mapping from preschool to employment, a way to capture the time span traveled and experience encountered and growth through the early use of portfolios were described. It's very similar to a parent memento, as we all have gathered, for those of us who are parents, of your child's early years, but with more detailed documentation of interests, successes, and highlights the student's areas of strengths. Next slide, please. When our students graduate with a traditional diploma and those remaining until 22 and aging out of special education, they need services in place to help them gain employment, access the community, and enroll in post-secondary education. There are some fantastic websites and free resources out there on the World Wide Web that help us with transition planning and collaborating with our students and their families regarding transition into adulthood. Begin to develop a student portfolio and a notebook. Based on the student's preference and ability, the portfolio could be built in a hard copy form or an electronic form, or you could use both. Transition notebooks or portfolios, electronic, can include a thumbnail sketch of students' abilities, disabilities, likes, dislikes, routines, and learning styles. Also include important information about students such as emergency numbers. reference section for students of any daily routine information that they may need to refer to, such as community information or task analysis of a daily event or job. Next slide, please. Let's explore national and state resources. Secondary transition and student portfolios are offered on many national and state resource websites. I will take this time to introduce some of the most common and easily accessed free secondary transition resources available at our fingertips. Next slide, please. The National Technical Assistance Center on Transition has a ton of free resources and promising practices for transition planning, graduation, and post-school success. It includes the subcategories echoing education, employment, and independent living. There is also an excellent toolkit section that includes resources for a variety of topics like planning and hosting a transition fair or finding age-appropriate transition assessments to assist the student in their self-discovery and aid in their portfolio building. The National Technical Assistance Center on Transition in its toolkit section also has a place with a link to build a portfolio. The guide will assist in building a portfolio, develop a favorable personal profile to include a pocket resume from the Transition Coalition Alliance. Next slide, please. The Transition Coalition, the pocket resume, helps students keep their information in a pocket-sized format so it's easy for their job applications as they travel and walk about submitting applications. Help your students keep their resumes in an easy-to-use format, and this is downloadable in PDF form and use a fillable feature, then print or print it and write on it, whatever's preferred. Find this resource and more at the Transition Coalition. Next slide, please. The National Collaborative on Workforce and Disability, Guideposts for Success, Navigating the Road to Work. The transition from youth to adulthood is challenging, and almost every young person has difficulty. Secondary transition is particularly challenging for young people with disabilities. And that is why secondary transition is a critical process to be conducted with concerted planning efforts over the years. A well thought out plan will help shape a young person's future and success with their post-secondary goals. Using the Guideposts for Success is a useful tool, navigating the road to work, making the connection between youth with disabilities and employment. Next slide, please. The transition portfolio should be centered on the introduction of the student. The Center for Change and Transition, empowering educators to improve transition services for students with disabilities. They have created a portfolio template that guides you through constructing a meaningful student portfolio to include all the subcategories: education, employment, and independent living. Job exploration, groundwork to include certificate, presentation of areas researched, reflection sheets, job exploration, work-based learning experience, workplace readiness training, home living, household and money management, transportation, law and politics, and personal safety and interpersonal relationships. Next slide, please. Coming up, T-Folio is a free online transition portfolio tool developed by the Center for Change and Transition. T-Folio is designed to guide youth in exploring, identifying, and planning for their desired post-secondary goals. The tool represents a compilation of activities and products showcasing each youth's ongoing transition process. It is their individual story of who they are, where they have been, and where they are headed after high school. Next slide, please. T-Folio will walk you through the basics. It will take you through, excuse me, T-Folio aligns with both the Individualized Education Program, or the IEP requirements and of transition planning, and the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation's pre-employment transition services categories. So both educators and agency personnel will find it useful and friendly to use. Next slide, please. California Career Zone with Ladder Up is a free resource provided by the California Career Resource Network, which contains content for students, parents, and educators. Continuing with the theme of developing a student portfolio early, California Career Zone has created an exploration for early learners called Up the Ladder. The features of Up the Ladder include fun game board style presentation, badges, and levels of achievement to track progress. As the student climbs the ladder upwards into their secondary schooling years, California Career Zone offers wide range of supports and resources for both middle school and high school levels of transition. Next slide, please. The California Career Zone portfolio option is grand. The link is there before you. It is also on the Padlet. Details on how to create the digital portfolio are there, and walkthrough of creating your account, which is all free. Next slide, please. Rolling back to what both Richard and Sue talked about for creating a recorded video of a resume. Richard shared various ways of person-centered planning that included the videos from his students. Sue shared a wide range of ways and opportunities to use it to illustrate the students' abilities. And using today's technology, try creating a video resume if that has not been in your tool bank or toolkit in use with your student. Include things specific to the purpose of the video. Is it for a job interview? Is it for an internship? Is it for a scholarship? Application or an application to volunteer at an organization. Video resume applications I am familiar with are iMovie, Video for Windows, or simply using your cell phone and uploading it onto a YouTube account. And then Richard shared using and creating business cards with a scanner app on them, hand them out to potential viewers and employers and people you want to connect your video to. I really loved this idea here shared. So look into it yourself. So next slide, please. So I'm gonna ask to play the video. The video is outlining simple steps in building a video resume. Please play video.
An employer see your personality, passion, and see if you are a good fit for their business. Here are some tips to make the most out of your video resume and land you that next job. 1. Plan before you film. Think about how you want the video to feel. Are you talking directly to the camera? Will you be interviewed? Or will you showcase a project you've worked on? 2. Work out the key points you want to say and write your ideas ahead of time to avoid saying too many ums. 3. Don't make it boring by reading out a script word for word, and don't just read out your written resume. An employer will read that if they want to. 4. Start by introducing yourself and tell the employer why you're the right person for the job. 5. The first few seconds of your video should grab the employer's attention, so be engaging and show enthusiasm. 6. Stand out from the crowd and show employers what you can offer them. 7. Approach your video resume in the same way you would a face-to-face meeting. Dress how you would if it was an interview, or in a way that matches the style of your video. Remember, keep it short and under 2 minutes. Make sure it passes the share test. Don't put out content you wouldn't want going viral. And take down the video when you're no longer looking for employment. You can find plenty of resources online. Just search Introductory Video Editing. So use your imagination and get filming.
All right, thank you. And last slide, the value of self-reflection in a transition portfolio. Allow the student to reflect on their practices. In each given year or period, the student spends growing in their own self-knowledge around their post-secondary goals, provide an opportunity for self-reflection, a reflection to inform practice, an important role in the growth development, just being able to better yourself for the next person to see, thinking through next step. What could I try differently that may be more beneficial to me and my goal in reaching my goals? A time to dig deeper into yourself, what worked well and what did not. And lastly, let's make these experiences for the students we serve and their journey to adulthood a positive and benefit of our time with them. Thank you for your time today.
Wow, if everyone who is viewing the webinar didn't get their needs met or resources, it was just chock full. So Val had also put some resources on this last slide. We have the PowerPoint up on the Padlet. And if we go to the next slide, we would greatly appreciate if you could answer our survey. We will, this is the Padlet link. We will send out a survey and evaluation for all of you to complete and help us in upcoming webinars. Hit the mark and make sure that we're getting your needs met. So thank you to the California Transition Alliance leadership team, and we hope to see you next week. Be sure to register for Transition Services Week 3. These webinars will be weekly on Wednesdays from 3 to 4:30 until June 3rd. So thank you all for attending, and we will see you next week. Thank you.